and welcome to Voices of Truth One-on-One with Hawaii's Future, brought to you by the Kiwani Foundation. I'm Ehuke Kahu Cardwell, and here we are today in Waimanalo on the windward side of Oahu. And wait until you see who we have on the show for you today. Let's go on over here and meet him. Leon.
Aloha.
Aloha.
There.
Micah Oi.
I'm Micah Itu.
Good, good. Yeah. Leon Siu. I said your name right,
yes.
I know, because we know each
other.
We
know each other very well.
Great. Welcome back to Voices of Truth.
Mahalo. Good to be here.
Wonderful. Leon, we wanted to have you on the show today because you have been spending a lot of time at the United Nations, both in New York City as well as in Geneva.
Yes.
And first of all, we wanted to have you give us an update on what's been going on at the UN in Geneva and New York City for Hawaii, because it's been exciting. Some very good things have been happening, yes?
Yes, yes. Yeah. For many years, we actually have been keeping up, delivering a narrative to help to dispel the myths about Hawaii that most people have. They think we're part of the United States and all that, and understandably so, because that's what the United States narrative has been all these years.
Yeah, they haven't heard any different.
Right. So what we've been doing is to challenge that narrative by telling the truth about what actually happened here. So we're getting some very, very good response from that, and especially good pass-through through the various media of the international media, magazines and newspapers and online publications and things like that. They're beginning to tell our story the way it actually happened.
So the international media is beginning to notice.
Yes.
And pay attention to what you're telling them.
Yes, yes. So this gives us a platform now to deliver, or to actually encourage them to find out more and to talk about how we might be able to remedy our problem here we have in Hawaii, which is we're under occupation by the United States. And so that particular narrative is now being talked about quite a bit, that Hawaii is a sovereign country being occupied by the United States. And so what I've been doing lately is we're working toward an actual action we can take. Well, we'll talk about that later. But in the general scheme of things, there are lots of other people who are in our situation, where they're striving for independence, and they actually, the United Nations, ironically, has closed the door on any peaceful means to achieve independence.
So you're talking about other countries?
Yes, I'm talking about other countries, other places like West Papua, the Mapuche in South America, the Kashmir in Asia, and there's lots and lots. There's a couple of dozen, at least, that I know of, that are striving for independence but have no means through a peaceful remedy like the United Nations should have provided through their decolonization process. So what we've found out is over the last 40 years, really, the United Nations has slowly shut down its decolonization process, basically being encouraged by the number of states that had colonies, saying it's all over now. We're close to the end of it. Great, we'll just take care of this last few cases. There are 17 more countries on the list to be decolonized, but it's been that way for 30 years.
So the colonizers have said that through the United Nations. There's nobody else that needs to be decolonized after these 17.
Only these 17 are left. And we'll just have a big celebration when we have had that happens. And for now, that's it. And so they're basically blocking the way of anybody else bringing up an issue. Now, the reason that we're concerned about that is because even though Hawaii was not colonized, we never became, during the 19th century, like other countries, that became colonies of France or Great Britain or America. Hawaii was never colonized, and we understand that. But it actually went through a decolonization process as if it was colonized. So what happened with the United Nations was that in 1946, when they started up a decolonization process for 75% of the world, there were colonies of 12 countries, and mostly European countries and the United States. So when they decided they would decolonize the world and started to do so, the United States could see the decolonization process sort of closing in on them, and they were perfectly willing to decolonize everybody else except Hawaii and Alaska. So they submitted Hawaii and Alaska along with 5 other of their territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, etc., American Samoa. So they submitted those countries along with Alaska and Hawaii as countries to be decolonized. And then in 1959, they actually invoked a decolonization process, or that's actually they conducted a decolonization process called statehood.
Yeah, a fake decolonization
Right,
process.
right.
Yes.
But they told the UN that this was a decolonization process, and nobody in Hawaii understood what it was all about.
Right.
We were never told. There was never any discussion or mention that this might be a choice for independence, or for free association, or any of the other ways that we could act on decolonization.
Yeah.
And so
they call that a stacked deck.
Yes, very much so, very much so. Talk about a fixed election.
Yes.
That was
Yeah.
a very great example. So in 1959, they conducted this fake plebiscite or referendum here in Hawaii, and lo and behold, they reported to the United Nations that 95% of the people who voted approved or voted for statehood. Of course, there was nothing else on the ballot except statehood. And they also said that both Hawaii and Alaska were now inducted into the United States as permanent members of the Union of States of the United States. Alaska the 49th state and Hawaii the 50th state. And they submitted that report to the United Nations in 1959. And the United Nations, rather than look at how the referenda were conducted or who voted and things like that, they simply rubber stamped the U.S. report and proclaimed that the situation of Hawaii and Alaska has now been settled by a vote and the consent of the voters of both places. And so now we're part of the United States.
So wait a minute, the UN never even looked into this thing.
They didn't look into it.
Never lifted a corner to check it out.
No.
They just took the U.S.'s word for it.
Right, because actually the U.S. was very clever in how they presented it. It looked like the people voted, but they actually didn't. And it looked like they had a free choice.
Well, some of the people voted, obviously, but that 95% of the people that voted yes on the ballot was a minority of the people that were eligible to vote.
That's correct. Only 35 of the eligible voters voted. 35% of the eligible voters voted.
So
in
really,
that election. So it was 95% of 35%.
So it was really a majority of a minority.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And with that,
well, there's another disqualifying factor.
Okay, what is that?
And that was the only ones who voted had to proclaim or declare they were U.S. citizens. So that is a complete contradiction of the whole process of decolonization.
Yes.
In which the people, the nationals of that country, would be the only ones to vote, not the settlers, not the citizens of a foreign country. But in this particular case, only the citizens of a foreign country voted. There were lots of Hawaiians who were citizens of a foreign country at that time, and they voted. But of course, there were a lot of settlers and the military who voted in that election.
So another way that they stacked the deck.
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
2 ways. So that's how it has been ever since. And for the record, the UN acknowledges that Hawaii is part of the United States because of a voice of consent. Now, but what the United States did actually leaves us an opportunity to question it now, and to say, or to actually ask for a review by the United Nations to see whether or not they followed the proper procedure. And we know they didn't. They didn't even ask, or they didn't even question what happened. So if they open a review today and question what happened, they will find that the United States had lied to them in their report that, like we just were talking about, only 35% of the eligible voters voted, and all of them were U.S. citizens, and they only voted on one question. All of that will disqualify the United States report that Hawaii had given our consent, Hawaiians had given our consent to become part of the United States. So at the very least, it would disqualify that. But in the long run, because of what we have been able to uncover over the last 30, 40 years, finding out our true identity and our true status as a foreign nation, or as a sovereign nation.
An independent
An
nation.
independent nation that was never extinguished. That means if the United States claim is discredited, then the only claim there is, and the only left standing, is the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so, should the United Nations do their due diligence, find out they made an error, and rescind the resolution that they passed in 1959, it would automatically cancel the United States' claim to Hawaii, and by default, the only only claimant left is the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Okay, so that needs to be revealed.
Yes.
And so the reason you've been going to the UN is because you're the guy that's helping get that revealed, yes?
Yes, yes. And it's difficult because actually we've been successful, as I said earlier, in correcting the narrative that the U.S. had been using. But in doing so, we've also put many of the nations in an awkward position in that they would like to help us to correct the situation, remedy the situation, but they're not really up to going up against the United States.
You're talking about
directly.
other nations that are UN members.
Right, correct. And so, so they're saying, well, we really feel for what happened with you, and we would like to help you, but come back another time when it's safer for us to do so.
Sure.
Not in so many words. And so what we have actually done was found a safer way that they could actually approach this without exposing themselves as confronting the United States directly.
Okay.
And so this is where we are right now, and we are working on getting a resolution on the basis of their only questioning the United Nations decision in this matter, and not the US's input or anything, just the UN's decision. So we are working now on actually securing 1 or 2, 3, maybe half a dozen small countries who would actually ask the United Nations to conduct this review. Once that that resolution gets into the United Nations, they would have to have in due time a vote by the entire General Assembly, which is 193 countries. And we are certain that over 2/3 of that body, we only need a majority vote to get that passed, but I'm certain over 2/3 will actually vote to call for a review of a United Nations possible mistake.
Leon, one of the things that strikes me as strange is if Hawaii was never colonized by the U.S., and of course we know it wasn't, then how can Hawaii go through a decolonization process?
Well, that's a very, very good question. As we know, all along the way from the 1893 overthrow, which was illegal, and the 1898 annexation, which was illegal, the United States had been getting away with it. In other words, nobody protested, and they just simply went ahead. So by the time after World War II came along, and they had 50 years practically of indoctrinating Hawaiians into believing we're all part of the United States and having no objection to the identity as Hawaii being a territory of the United States, then the United States very boldly put us on the list of the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories. And by doing so, they said we were a colony that was could be in the process of becoming decolonized. So they changed our identity right there, and the United Nations went along with it. They didn't know any better. And then they used that decolonization process to sort of cement the notion that we're part of the United States, and then said, but look, Hawaii now has voted to become a permanent member of the United States. And that's what happened. So we actually were decolonized even though we weren't a colony. But the tricky part is that they used the United Nations decolonization process. So that decolonization process is actually now something that we can question, in that it had been used adversely against us, not to free us, but to capture us.
Because it was based on lie on top of lie on top of lie.
Right.
Yes?
And the United Nations used its own procedures to go along with the United States. They basically became complicit in the crime.
They either looked the other way or didn't bother to look at all.
Right. And just assumed the United States was doing what was right. So that decolonization process is actually very important to us. Even though we were never colonized, we actually were, from the standpoint that we were identified as being a colony of the United States in 1946. And it was accepted by the United Nations, and then the United Nations followed through in 1959 with saying, now you're no longer a colony of the United States. And so that's why we need to actually focus on the colonial or decolonization process of the United Nations. Because not only is it now closed to other countries and nations that we want to become decolonized, it's also closed to being questioned about what happened in the past. And we need to have that reopened.
Wow. And so this is where it gets really tricky.
Yes.
Because, well, for one thing, you know, a lot of people say that in Hawaii, that Hawaii was colonized. And other people say, no, Hawaii was never colonized. And so, and yet it went through a decolonization process. So it's kind of like, okay, wait a minute now. Which way is up? Which one of these is true? And
yes.
So would it be accurate to say that, I mean, the land was never colonized because all we need to do...
Technically, yes, it was.
Okay, how?
Because when the United States came in, they treated us as a colony. They took over our lands, and they basically said this is all United States lands, and the people are all United States. So anyway, United States citizens. So even though they did not go through a formal colonization process, the result that they created was that of a colony of the United States. And so right now there's quite a bit of discussion going on at the United Nations, and that we have to separate the two definitions or the broader definition of colonialism from the narrower one.
Okay, so what are those two?
The narrower one is that it refers to the geopolitical situation or status of a place. That is colonialism. You're either a colony of another country, or you're an independent, or some other situation that you voted for. But when you look at the broader meaning of colonialism, and which is what most people are talking about today, when a country comes in and changes the society and the structures in your society and imposes its colonial system, and you become independent, you still have those colonial structures in place. And so you're still colonized. And so this is where the discussion is talking about today about decolonization. We want to decolonize the social structures, the economic structures, the governmental structures of a colonial mindset, which still pervades around all over the world. And we want to replace that with a much more homegrown way of looking at how we govern ourselves, how we conduct our society. So decolonization today is much broader than what it was thought to be back in 1940s or 50s or 60s. We're talking about now decolonizing countries that have maintained the colonial structures in place. So they're independent, but they're still colonized because of the way that they conduct their business and their affairs.
So if I understand you correctly, Leon, it's the colonizer may still not be present in that country. They may have left, but the system the colonizer imposed is still there and functioning in the country, correct?
Exactly. And so that country still has the character of a colonial country because of how it functions and how it operates, and in many respects how it treats its people. So the decolonization effort that is going now is to try to remove those vestiges of the colonial system that are still there, that are impairing or harming the country that it's in, even though that country is now an independent country.
Hmm. And that includes what's called the colonized mind, yes?
Yes.
And we see that as very prevalent here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Because people here in Hawaii refer to the U.S. as the mainland,
Right.
instead of as U.S., a foreign
Right.
country. When they talk about the military, they say the military instead of the U.S. military, which would really mean a foreign military power here.
Uh-huh.
And when they talk about senators, they say senator instead of U.S. senator,
Right.
a foreign politician.
That's right, right.
So on and so
This
forth, yes.
form of thinking is embedded in our culture.
Very
in our
deeply and
nation.
very
Yes.
widely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so these are the things we have to start to ferret out and correct, even in our own minds first.
You're working with a decolonization committee at the UN, yes?
Yes. There is a decolonization committee of the UN, but I'm working with organizing something called the NGO Working Group on Decolonization.
And NGO stands for?
It stands for the non-governmental organizations. And so we have roughly 600 non-governmental organizations that have a special status with the United Nations that have banded together to approve the forming of this committee or this working group in order to push the United Nations so that they will go ahead and actually perform or accomplish the great goals that they're talking about, which is the eradication of colonialism.
So this working group, if I understand you correctly, the purpose of it is to re-energize or restart under the UN, the Decolonization Committee, to start looking at these issues again, yes?
Yes, yes.
Gotcha.
So that the UN will actually be put into a place where they would actually have to do something about the eradication of colonialism.
They would have to walk their talk.
That's right. Or
Okay.
hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so this is what the project I've been working on in New York for the last, well, actually for about 2 years, but we actually got it started in April of this year.
Hmm. And so how many other countries or entities are a part of this working group besides Hawaii?
Yes. Well, the original organization is about 30 non-governmental organizations. And that's we're going to keep it to that. We're not actually asking countries to join it. These are all non-governing organizations, but countries can also participate in the discussions and to help to validate some of the programs and the actions that we're taking.
Okay, but these non-government NGOs, non-government organizations, are from countries all over the world, yes?
In our initial organizational meeting, we had non-governing organizations from all 6 continents and Oceania.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Very wide representation.
Yes, and more and more joining each week.
Okay. And so they're joining not just to help Hawaii out, but they're joining because they're either in the same or similar position that Hawaii is, or they see other countries close to them that are going through the same thing.
Or they see that colonialism needs to be eradicated, and they want to get behind that. One of the things that works on our behalf is that everyone in the world regards Hawaii as a very special place. You know, if I travel anywhere in the world and they hear I'm from Hawaii, they start talking immediately how they'd love to visit sometime, or how they visited for their niece's wedding or something, and just go on and how much they love Hawaii. And these people, you know, maybe had a few days exposure to Hawaii, and many of them never have been here, but they're dreaming about coming here. So there's something very special about Hawaii. Hawaii represents aloha. And I really believe we have that to contribute to the world, to this huge turmoil that's going on in the world. What it needs is aloha. Just like Auntie Pulahi Paki said years ago, what the world needs is aloha. This entire episode of the United States occupation and its taking over of Hawaii and all that is not only a huge injustice against us, it's actually a great embarrassment for the United States, which has this image that it's out there for peace and democracy and righteousness and all of that. And even though we can show that they have not really lived up to it, that's really what they're trying to do. So again, I say, if we can find them, the United States, a way that they can get out of this sticky situation, which is getting stickier by the minute for them, but if we can find a way that they can gracefully withdraw and allow them to do so gracefully with aloha, then I believe that this can happen.
Great. And that is where we have to leave it. Leon, mahalo for being on Voices of Truth once again with us to update our viewers and let us know what you guys have been doing at the UN. You've been doing very good work, it sounds like. Again, thank you for being here and explaining the situation to us and giving us the latest updates, and please continue to keep up your work.
I will.
And mahalo to our viewers for joining Leon and me here in Waimanalo today, beautiful Waimanalo. Remember, you can watch us on the web 24/7 on voicesoftruth.tv.com, and you can like Voices of Truth One-on-One with Hawaii's Future on Facebook. I'm Ehuke Kahu Cardwell for the Kiwani Foundation, along with Leon Siu here. And until next time, hui ho.
Aloha.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.